I married into what I can only describe as a military dynasty. My ex-wife Jessica was the daughter of General Marcus Fletcher, a decorated army officer who treated every conversation like a command briefing and every family gathering like a performance review. I was perpetually failing. This man had more medals than an Olympic athlete, a handshake that could double as a bone density test, and enough ego to require its own weather system. Let me tell you about Marcus Fletcher. He didn't just serve in the military, he was the military in his own mind. Everything revolved around rank, discipline, and this obsession with what he called real masculinity. The guy woke up at 4:30 every morning to maintain discipline, even though he'd been retired for a decade. He ironed his socks. He saluted his coffee before drinking it. I once caught him yelling at his toaster for showing hesitation. When people thanked him for his service, he'd launch into these epic speeches about strategic operations like he'd personally orchestrated every military victory since the Revolutionary War. His house was basically a monument to himself. Every wall covered in framed photos of him shaking hands with presidents, senators, and various military brass. There was a trophy room, and I'm not exaggerating, an actual room dedicated exclusively to his medals, commendations, and motivational quotes that all basically said, "You'll never be me." He had this massive portrait in dress uniform that looked like it belonged in the Pentagon. His doormat literally said, "Welcome to Command Center Fletcher." The guy even had a custom flag outside. Zero concept of humility. And me? I work in cyber intelligence for a defense contractor. I write algorithms, track digital threats, reroute military operations when things go sideways, and analyze data patterns that keep soldiers alive in hostile territory. It's classified work, the kind where you sign documents saying you'll go to prison if you breathe a word of it to anyone. My job involves preventing satellite strikes, tracking hostile cyber activity in real time, and making sure missions don't end up as body counts. But to General Fletcher, I was just the IT guy who somehow tricked his daughter into marriage. He'd call me a keyboard warrior at family dinners with this smug smirk, like he'd just delivered the punchline of the century. Here's how Jessica and I met, and it's actually kind of ridiculous in retrospect. There was this charity gala 5 years ago, one of those events where wealthy people bid on dates with volunteers to feel philanthropic. Jessica's father dared her to do something bold, to step outside her comfort zone. She decided to bid on me. $5,000. That's what I cost that night. She walked up after the auction with champagne in one hand, all sharp heels and sharper wit, red dress that could stop traffic, and said, "You better be worth it. $5,000 could have gotten me 2 weeks in Bali." I told her that depends on whether they serve sarcasm in Bali. She laughed, that short, precise laugh that says, "I already like you, but I'll pretend not to." And that was it. I was hooked. Those first dates were electric. She was brilliant, a lawyer who could argue a wall into apologizing. Funny in that cutting way that keeps you on your toes. We'd stay up until 3 in the morning, talking about everything and nothing. She told me she'd never dated anyone her father didn't handpick, that I was her act of rebellion. I thought it was romantic. Turns out rebellion looks a lot like control issues when it's wearing expensive perfume. I fell hard and fast. We got married after 2 years of dating, and that first year was genuinely great. We were the Instagram couple everyone envied. Coordinated outfits, exotic vacations to places we couldn't afford, matching smiles for the camera. But what nobody saw on social media was how we treated happiness like a competitive sport. She wanted to be the perfect wife on paper. I wanted to prove her father wrong about me. Somewhere in there, we stopped being partners and became opponents fighting for control of the same relationship. But the real cancer in our marriage was Marcus. From day one, that man made it his personal mission to remind me I wasn't good enough for his daughter. Our first handshake at a family barbecue, I could feel him testing my grip, judging whether I squeezed hard enough to meet his standards. At our wedding reception, his toast included the phrase, "I hope you're ready for the challenge of being married to a Fletcher, because this family doesn't accept weakness." Not congratulations, not welcome to the family, just a thinly veiled warning that I was entering his territory and he'd be watching. Sunday dinners at their house were psychological warfare disguised as pot roast and vegetables. Picture this massive dining room with a table that could seat 12. Helen cooking these elaborate meals she'd spent all day preparing, and Marcus holding court at the head of the table like a king addressing his subjects. Every single week, same torturous routine. He'd start with the casual insults disguised as conversation. "So Daniel still playing on computers all day?" While carving his steak with the precision of someone demonstrating knife combat techniques, or "Must be nice having a job where the biggest emergency is a slow internet connection." Jessica would shoot me these apologetic looks but never defended me. Not once. Her mom would just refill her wine glass and stare out the window like she was calculating escape trajectories. One dinner, I made the mistake of actually explaining what I do, how my algorithms track hostile cyber activity across multiple networks simultaneously, how I've prevented attacks that could have eliminated civilians, how I've rerouted operations to save missions when everything went wrong. I thought maybe if he understood the actual stakes, he'd respect it. He listened, nodded like he was processing, then said, "So basically, you sit behind a screen in air conditioning while braver men bleed in deserts." I laughed to keep from throwing my plate. "Something like that, General. Though if I stopped doing my job for 5 minutes, some of those braver men wouldn't make it home to tell their stories." He didn't flinch, just said, "Still softer than actual combat." It was like arguing with a brick wall that had a PhD in condescension. The man believed emotions were weakness, that vulnerability was something only civilians did. He had this worldview where everything was measurable by visible scars and physical dominance. If you couldn't bench press your problems or shoot them, you weren't really solving anything. Another dinner, I brought dessert from this fancy bakery downtown, trying to contribute something to the meal. Marcus looked at the box like I'd just brought roadkill to the table. "You didn't make this yourself?" he asked, voice heavy with disapproval. "No, sir," I said. "It's from a bakery downtown. They're known for their cheesecake." He actually frowned and said, "A man who can't even bake isn't much of a provider." I pointed out that I can reroute military satellites from my laptop and prevent drone strikes with code, so I think I'll survive not knowing how to separate egg whites. Jessica laughed nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. He didn't laugh at all. His frown deepened and he said, "You joke too much. Shows lack of seriousness." I replied that humor beats crying, which is my other option at these dinners. That night, Jessica told me I was being antagonistic and making things worse. I told her I was just trying to survive with my dignity and sanity intact. He even tried to bond with me once, if you can call it that. Invited me on a guy's weekend to a shooting range in Virginia. I thought maybe this was progress. Maybe the general wanted to bury the hatchet. Spoiler alert, he wanted to bury it in me. We get there, he hands me a rifle and says, "Let's see if you can hit something other than a keyboard." Real comedian, this guy. I nailed every target, by the way. Grouped shots so tight they could have been one hole. He looked at my target sheet, jaw twitching slightly, and said, "Beginner's luck." I smiled and said, "That's what Jessica said about our marriage." For a second, I thought he might actually laugh. Instead, he reloaded and muttered, "Overconfidence gets men eliminated." I told him, "Guess I'll die smiling then." He didn't appreciate that response. The worst part wasn't Marcus himself, though. It was watching Jessica slowly adopt her father's view of me. In the beginning, she was genuinely proud of my work. She'd tell friends I did important classified government stuff and brag about my security clearance. She thought it was impressive that I couldn't talk about my job, but after enough dinners absorbing her father's contempt, marinating in his disapproval, she started seeing me through his eyes instead of her own. I'll never forget this moment at her law firm's holiday party. We're at this fancy rooftop venue, expensive wine flowing like water, everyone trying to out-impressive each other. Some senior partner in a suit that cost more than my car asked Jessica what I did for work. Before I could even open my mouth to answer, she laughed and said, "Oh, he's my tech guy, keeps the Wi-Fi running." The whole table chuckled. She'd just reduced my entire career, years of classified work saving lives, to a punchline for professional networking points. In the car afterward, I said, "Tech guy? Really?" She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Babe, it was just a joke. Everyone jokes about their spouses." I told her no, a joke is funny. That was a public demotion. She said I was being too sensitive, that not everything was about validation. I gripped the steering wheel and said, "It is when you're married to someone whose father calls them a glorified keyboard warrior at every meal." The silence that followed was the kind that sticks to your teeth and tastes like resentment. That's when I realized something crucial. Jessica didn't want a husband. She wanted a mirror to reflect her accomplishments without casting its own light. She wanted someone who made her look good without threatening to be equally impressive. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. I got promoted to head of cyber operations, which was a huge deal. We're talking significant pay raise, leading a team of analysts, high-level security briefings. I came home with champagne, ready to celebrate this massive career milestone. She smiled, hugged me, said, "That's great, honey. I'm proud of you." Then, without missing a beat, she immediately pivoted to talking about her case and some judge who'd underestimated her in court that day. Never asked a single question about my promotion, what it meant, what I'd be doing, nothing. I ended up drinking that champagne alone in the kitchen at midnight while she typed on her laptop in the other room. When I started getting more public recognition, articles in defense industry publications, invitations to speak at cybersecurity conferences, interviews about emerging threats, she got noticeably colder. Not jealous exactly, just competitive. Like my success was somehow stealing from her spotlight, like there was only room for one impressive person in our marriage. After a major cybersecurity conference in DC where I gave the keynote speech about algorithmic threat detection, she said, "You were really good up there, almost too good. Now everyone expects you to be brilliant all the time." I said, "I'll try to manage that burden somehow." She smiled thinly and said, "Just don't forget who helped you pick that tie." Even her compliments came with receipts attached. By year 3, our house felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit. She had her side perfect, minimalist, color-coordinated like something from an interior design magazine. I had mine cluttered, lived in, full of cables and coffee mugs and actual signs of human habitation. We talked, but didn't communicate. We shared physical space, but not emotional connection. The woman who once made my heart race now made my pulse spike for entirely different, unpleasant reasons. I knew something was definitely going on about 6 months before the gala. She started working late constantly, coming home after midnight. She'd go straight to her laptop without really looking at me. When she did talk, she was distant, distracted, like I was an NPC in her life instead of her husband. I'm not an idiot. I do intelligence work for a living. Pattern recognition is literally my job. The secretive phone calls where she'd leave the room, the way she'd smile at her screen when she thought I wasn't watching, how she'd suddenly need to shower and change before running to the office at 9 p.m. dressed like she had a date. The new lingerie I'd never seen. I confronted her one night after she came home at 1 a.m. claiming she was working on a brief. She denied everything, got defensive, said I was being paranoid and controlling. Then she said she needed space to figure out what she wanted from life. That's relationship code for, "I'm already emotionally gone but haven't made it official yet." She moved into her father's guest house the next week for what she called clarity. I knew what that meant. Marcus had been poisoning the well for years, telling her she'd married beneath her station, that she could do better than a keyboard warrior. Now she was finally listening to him. About 3 weeks later, I got the invitation to General Marcus Fletcher's retirement gala. Jessica called me directly, which was weird since we'd barely spoken. She said it would look strange if I didn't attend, that people would ask questions, that we should maintain appearances until we figured out next steps. Part of me wanted to tell her to forget it, that I was done performing for her family's benefit. But another part, the part that had endured 3 years of condescension and dismissal, wanted to show up with my head held high, prove I wasn't destroyed by their rejection. The event was at this massive veterans hall, the kind of place that smells like floor polish, cheap cologne, and decades of patriotism compressed into the walls. American flags everywhere you looked, a brass band struggling through military marches, and enough decorated officers to invade a small country. General Fletcher was in his absolute element, working the room like a presidential candidate at a fundraiser, everyone competing for a moment of his legendary attention. I grabbed some watered-down lemonade from the bar and found a seat near the back. Not hiding exactly, just strategically positioning myself away from potential confrontations. The evening started with dinner, rubbery chicken that had seen better days and deviled eggs that looked like they'd been through their own personal war. Then came the speeches, and there were a lot of them. Everyone wanted to praise Marcus Fletcher. Finally, Marcus himself took the stage to thunderous applause and launched into this epic speech about service, sacrifice, and what it means to be a real leader in today's world. The crowd absolutely ate it up. He had this commanding presence where even his pauses felt meaningful, like he was letting profound wisdom sink into your bones. He thanked everyone for coming, made inside jokes only military people laughed at, and basically took an extended victory lap for his entire career. I sat there sipping my drink, checking my watch, calculating how soon I could leave without causing gossip. Then his tone shifted. He started talking about the future of the family, about legacy, about what real leadership looks like in the next generation. My stomach dropped because I could sense what was coming like incoming artillery. He said something about being proud to welcome someone who truly embodies military values and represents everything the Fletcher family stands for. Then he called up this Navy SEAL named Lieutenant Ryan Cross. This guy looked like he'd been engineered in a lab specifically to be Marcus Fletcher's ideal son-in-law. Tall, square-jawed, chest decorated with enough medals to set off metal detectors. The kind of rigid posture that screams discipline and dedication. Everything Marcus valued in a human being, wrapped up in one conventionally impressive package. The crowd erupted in applause as Ryan took the stage, looking every inch the hero. That's when Marcus dropped the nuclear bomb. This outstanding officer represents everything this family stands for. He understands sacrifice, honor, and duty. And I'm deeply honored to announce his engagement to my daughter, Jessica. The room exploded in applause and whistles. Jessica appeared from the side in this stunning red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And they held hands while camera flashes went off and everyone cheered like they were watching a rom-com ending. I sat there completely frozen, my grip on my glass so tight, I'm genuinely surprised it didn't shatter. I knew intellectually that the marriage was over, had known for months, but finding out like this, in front of 200 people while being implicitly used as the failure she'd moved on from, was a specially crafted form of psychological cruelty. But Marcus wasn't finished destroying me. He looked directly at me, made sure I saw him seeing me, and said, "Unlike some people who've disappointed this family and never grasped what true service actually means, Ryan here understands sacrifice. He's a warrior, a protector, a real man, finally, someone this family can be genuinely proud of." The polite laughter and murmurs that followed were somehow worse than if he'd just screamed insults at me. People turned in their seats to look at me, some with pity, some with curiosity, some just entertained by the real-life drama unfolding. I was the punchline to Marcus Fletcher's retirement celebration, the disappointing first draft sitting in the back while everyone celebrated the upgrade, the failure in a suit, being publicly executed by implication while everyone applauded. I carefully set down my glass, took a deep breath, and decided I was done. I'd absorbed enough humiliation for 10 lifetimes. I started to stand up, planning to walk out with whatever microscopic shred of dignity I had left, already mentally composing the angry text I'd never actually send. But then something absolutely wild happened that I still can't fully believe. Ryan Cross, this confident Navy SEAL who'd been basking in applause and admiration, locked eyes with me from the stage. His smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. All the color drained from his face like he'd seen a ghost. He went pale, then red, then pale again. That confident military bearing completely disappeared, replaced by what looked like shock, mixed with recognition, mixed with something like fear. He leaned over to Marcus and whispered something urgently in his ear. Marcus frowned deeply, looking extremely annoyed at having his big moment interrupted. Ryan whispered again, more insistently this time, his hand gripping Marcus's arm. Other officers on stage started noticing something was wrong. Jessica looked confused. The crowd sensed the shift in energy, that triumphant celebration vibe turning into confused tension you could cut with a knife. Ryan took the microphone, and I could see his hand shaking from where I sat. His voice actually cracked when he spoke, nothing like the strong military bearing he'd had a minute ago. "Sir, before we continue with anything else, there's something everyone in this room needs to know." Marcus tried to wave him off, but Ryan stepped closer to the microphone, visibly gathering courage. "That man in the back, Daniel Morrison, he's the reason I'm alive. He's the reason I'm standing here today." The room went dead silent, like someone had hit a mute button on reality. You could have heard a pin drop from across the hall. Every single person turned to stare at me like I just announced I was from Mars. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Absolutely no idea where this was going, but sensing something massive was about to happen. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced, nervous, like he was trying to regain control. "Son, I think you're confused. That's my former son-in-law. He works an office job pushing papers. He's not out saving lives." Ryan shook his head firmly, almost desperately. "No, sir. With all due respect, you don't understand at all. That man right there saved my entire unit 3 years ago in Middle East. We were ambushed, trapped with no way out. Our convoy got hit hard. Communications completely jammed, GPS totally down. Command had essentially written us off as casualties. We were pinned down taking fire with no extraction plan." The whispers started spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Marcus's confident expression began visibly cracking around the edges like ice breaking. Jessica looked completely lost, like someone had switched the script to a play she'd never rehearsed. Ryan's voice got stronger as he continued. Then this voice came through on our emergency frequency. Calm, professional. like he was ordering coffee instead of coordinating a rescue from an active combat zone. He told us he was rerouting our extraction in real time. He gave us coordinates to terrain that wasn't on any of our official maps, walked us through territory we couldn't see, guided us around hostile positions we didn't even know were there. We followed that voice through the dark for 6 straight hours. All 7 of us made it out. Not a single casualty. The room erupted in much louder whispers now. Urgent conversations breaking out everywhere. I could see veterans in the crowd nodding knowingly, some of them looking at me with this new recognition dawning on their faces. Marcus stood there looking like his brain was trying to process information that didn't compute with his entire worldview. When we got back to base, Ryan continued, and he was looking right at me now, we tried to find out who helped us. Everything was classified above our clearance level. They wouldn't tell us his name, his rank, where he worked, nothing. But the story spread anyway through our networks. We started calling him the Ghost, the analyst who appears when everyone else has given up, who pulls off impossible rescues and then vanishes without taking any credit. Some guys thought it was just a myth, a legend we told ourselves to feel better about getting lucky. He pointed directly at me with a trembling hand. But I never forgot that voice, that steady calm when everything around us was falling apart. The way he talked us through that nightmare like he could see the whole battlefield from above. And that's him sitting right there. That's the Ghost. I'd recognize him anywhere. An older veteran in the front row stood up slowly, and I recognized him as one of Marcus's longtime friends. I heard about that Middle East mission. My son was in that unit. He said the Ghost saved them when their own command had abandoned them as lost. Another veteran stood up, then another, then another. Pretty soon half the room was standing in this silent, powerful show of respect, this acknowledgement that transcended words. Marcus Fletcher stood on that stage, his carefully orchestrated retirement celebration completely hijacked, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time in 3 years of marriage. This man who'd spent countless dinners making me feel worthless was learning in real time that his disappointment of a son-in-law was actually a legend among the very soldiers he claimed to honor above all else. The moment stretched out forever. I could feel everyone's eyes burning into me. Some people had their phones out recording. Finally, I stood up slowly, buttoned my jacket with deliberate calm, and started walking toward the exit. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as I walked, everyone watching. As I passed the stage, I stopped and looked up at Marcus, at the general who'd spent years calling me soft, weak, unworthy of his daughter. "You were right about one thing, General," I said, loud enough for the room to hear clearly. "Some people don't understand what true service really means, but they're usually not the people you think they are. Real service doesn't need applause or medals or validation. It just needs to matter." I didn't wait for a response or reaction. I walked straight out into the parking lot, got into my car, and just sat there in the darkness while everything crashed over me in waves. My phone immediately started blowing up. Texts from Jessica coming in rapid fire, calls from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails piling up faster than I could process. I ignored all of it and just sat there breathing, feeling lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. The next few weeks were absolutely insane. The story spread through military networks like wildfire and dry brush. Turns out when you save a Navy SEAL unit, they remember and they talk. I got messages from people thanking me for operations I barely remembered, missions where my algorithms had made the difference between catastrophe and success. Former colleagues reached out. My boss called, officially concerned about operational security, but also grudgingly impressed that I'd maintained cover this long. Some journalists tried to interview me about being the Ghost. I declined everything. Jessica tried desperately to apologize. Long rambling texts, voicemails where she cried, emails that went on for pages. She kept saying she didn't know, that if she'd understood what I really did, she would have been different, would have defended me, would have loved me better. But that was exactly the problem. She needed my work to be publicly impressive and validated by her father's world before she could respect me as a human being. The fact that I was decent, that I loved her, that I showed up every day trying to make it work, none of that was enough. She needed external validation before I was worthy of basic respect and love. Ryan actually reached out about 2 weeks after the gala. He called me directly, apologized for the whole messy situation. Said once he realized who I actually was, he couldn't go through with marrying Jessica. It felt fundamentally wrong, like he was taking something that wasn't his, living a lie. I told him that was decent of him to recognize, but Jessica and I were finished regardless of what he did. He's actually a genuinely good guy. We grab coffee sometimes when he's in town, trade carefully worded stories about operations we can't fully discuss. Two people who understand what it means to serve quietly. About a month after everything publicly exploded, I got an unexpected call from Helen, Marcus's wife. She'd always been the quiet one during family dinners, the peacekeeper who smiled gracefully through decades of her husband's domination, the woman who'd perfected the art of disappearing while remaining visible. Her voice on the phone was soft but carried this urgent undertone. "Daniel, he's not doing well at all," she said carefully. "He hasn't been sleeping, barely eating. You should come by if you can." I almost said no reflexively. What did I owe these people after everything they'd put me through? But curiosity is a powerful force. It walks you right back into places you swore you'd burn to the ground and salted the earth. When I pulled up to the Fletcher estate, it looked the same as always on the surface. Immaculate lawn that looked professionally maintained, spotless driveway without a single crack, that ridiculously tall flagpole. But the house felt different somehow. The energy was heavier, like the air itself was exhausted from years of maintaining impossible standards. Helen met me at the door. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of maintaining perfection for decades had finally crushed something essential in her spine. "He's been in his study," she said quietly, leading me inside. "He hasn't left that chair since Monday. Won't talk to anyone except to say he's fine, which he clearly isn't." I walked down the familiar hallway, past all those photos of Marcus shaking hands with powerful people, all those carefully curated symbols of a man who'd built his entire identity on being untouchable and universally respected. When I reached the study door, it was cracked open. Inside, Marcus sat behind his massive oak desk, staring blankly at an untouched mug of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. He looked old in a way I'd never seen before. Not the natural aging kind where you just accumulate years, but the collapsed kind. The kind that comes from watching your pride and self-image die in public. He didn't look up when I walked in and sat down across from him. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he said finally, his voice still that command tone, but softer somehow, worn down at the edges. "Neither did I admitted honestly. He nodded once, still not meeting my eyes. "She told you I wasn't sleeping." He meant Helen. "She said you weren't doing well." He chuckled, but it was bitter and empty. Sleep's for men who don't have ghosts following them around. We sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, exhausted, like the air itself was tired of conflict. Finally, he said quietly, "You humiliated me in front of everyone I've ever commanded or respected." I told the truth. I corrected gently. "There's a difference." He looked up then, and those eyes that used to be sharp and full of judgment were dull now, hollowed out. Truth and humiliation aren't that different when you've spent your whole life building lies. For once in our entire relationship, I didn't have a comeback ready. He leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep. "You know what the absolute worst part was? It wasn't you exposing me, making me look like a fool. It was after. The silence after. Those men I'd commanded, the soldiers I'd served with, they all stood for you. I looked at their faces and all I saw was disappointment. Not in you, in me. Everything I thought I'd earned over 40 years just evaporated." He rubbed his temples like he had a headache that wouldn't quit. "I spent my entire adult life trying to be invincible. Collecting medals, climbing ranks, building a reputation. It all meant control to me. And then you walk in with nothing but a keyboard and destroy 40 years of carefully constructed image in 15 minutes. "That wasn't my intention," I said truthfully. He smiled faintly, sadly. "No, but maybe it was necessary. Maybe I needed to fall." That was the first time I'd ever heard him admit something like that. For a brief moment, I didn't see the general. I saw just a tired man who'd finally figured out that the war he'd been fighting his entire life wasn't against external enemies. It was against his own need for control and validation. We talked for over an hour after that. He told me about the aftermath, about veterans calling to ask why he'd treated the ghost that way, about former colleagues questioning his judgment. He'd stepped down from every committee and board he was on. "Helen said it was time," he explained quietly. "She was right, like she usually is about these things. When I finally stood to leave, he looked up at me with clear eyes for the first time. I never said it before, and I should have years ago. I'm proud of you, Daniel, of what you've accomplished, of who you are. One simple word. Proud. For Marcus Fletcher, it might as well have been a Medal of Honor ceremony. I nodded, feeling something loosen in my chest. Thank you for saying that, he smiled weakly. Don't thank me. You earned every bit of it the hardest way possible. Helen walked me out to my car. You did something for him no one else could, she said softly. You made him finally listen to someone besides himself. I told her I didn't mean to break him. She shook her head. You didn't break him, you freed him. There's a difference. I moved to a new city after that, took a promotion at a different company, started completely fresh. I'm seeing someone now named Sarah. She's a high school teacher, and she knew about my work from the beginning. She thinks it's incredible without needing anyone else to validate that opinion. That's enough. Life is quiet now, peaceful in ways I didn't think were possible. I don't need anyone's approval anymore, and that's the most liberating feeling I've ever experienced. I'm not carrying anger or resentment around. It's too heavy, and I'm done with heavy things. I ran into Marcus one last time about 3 months ago at a coffee shop downtown. He was with Helen, looked older and softer somehow. We made eye contact across the room, nodded at each other with something approaching understanding, and that was it. No drama, no confrontation, just two people who'd survived a war neither of them needed to keep fighting. So yeah, that's the story. That's how my father-in-law's ego imploded at his own retirement party, how my marriage ended in the most public way imaginable, and how I walked away from all of it with my dignity intact. Not because I planned some brilliant revenge, but because when you live with integrity, the truth eventually defends itself when it matters most. The ghost rode off into the sunset, and he's perfectly fine with nobody noticing.